my personality is such that, walking into a big conference room and slapping a name tag on and just going and making small talk with either like-minded people or not, it's hard for me. It's, I'm allergic to that type of environment.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Bar podcast. I'm your host, Anisa Tova. And today I have a pleasure of sitting down with Jonathan Steele. He's a partner at Bierman LLP, Chicago native. He's made his mark in a family law. And if I recall correctly, because we chatted for just briefly, actually, from starting as a 16-year-old clerk to becoming a respected divorce attorney, Jonathan sure brings unique perspective to the field. And, he is known for his direct approach and a dry sense of humor, which is quite good. And today we'll definitely peel back some of the layers. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Hey, did I get it right? Did you start clerking for a divorce lawyer like at 16? And which is a sort of an unusual summer job for a teenager.
I think it's unusual, and I think it's unusual to stay in that same job for as long as I have. But you did get it right. I did start clerking for a divorce lawyer when I was 16.
So what drew you to the field to begin with?
I was interested in being a lawyer from as early as I could talk/argue. And that came just from, my grandfather was a lawyer and I sort of wanted to follow in those footsteps. And then I had a family friend that was a divorce lawyer and he gave me a summer clerkship, which started out just as like, go for work, do filing, get my car washed, that sort of thing. And I just sort of latched on to him and have ridden along with him from that firm into our new firm. So I don't know that I've ever really been drawn to the field of divorce law per se. I think it was more just falling into it.
And how do you feel about it now? Just sort of following into it almost felt like it was sort of this natural progression. It was something that you did and then continued on. Is there how do you feel about what you do now?
It's a good question, and the answer is going to change based on the day that you ask me that question. It might even change based on the hour of the day. Today, I had the pleasure of being in a hearing where we're talking about allocating steak knives and laundry bins and garbage cans. And I don't love that part of the job by any means. And it's a very emotional field. Obviously, people going through a divorce are emotional. I don't have a whole lot of those. It's not really what, draws me to being a lawyer. But I like being a lawyer. It's just that the field of divorce tends to be a little bit emotional for my taste at times.
Yeah, let's talk about that because that's not easy. And we all have stuff, that triggers us, whether we like it or not. So if you do have an emotional, or maybe more than usual emotional client, how do you steer them in sort of, in how do you move them forward and help them to finding a practical resolution?
I try to be forthright with them and manage expectations, and I try to explain that I will listen, but I'm an expensive ear if it's just a matter of, ruminating or complaining or talking about how your divorce is making you feel. And I try to point people in the direction of resources that are better equipped to have those conversations, whether that's connecting someone with a therapist or with a life coach. There's a lot of resources out there, and I don't want to say those people care more, but they're more trained to field those kind of conversations that aren't really touching on the law at all.
What about the opposing attorney? Some practitioners, as you know, they can take on that emotion from their client, and it can be just as challenging. How do you deal with that?
That's a very true and very unfortunate reality. We sometimes refer to it as the other lawyers drinking the Kool-Aid, but they, because it's an emotional practice and because lawyers or divorce lawyers get the panicked and emotional phone calls, it wears on people. If they, don't have the skin to field those calls and not let it affect them personally, then they do take on their clients' emotions, and they do become, too personally vested in the outcome, and so that comes out in court, and it ends up being a liability more often than it ends up being an asset for the client. And so, how do I approach those lawyers? I guess just, with caution, because it's clear very early on which lawyers are too invested in the facts. And it's hard to negotiate with those people because they're not like-minded. They're not thinking cost benefit. They're thinking right and wrong, telling a story. And sometimes that's not what, the litigation process is about.
And I remember, I think you shared with me a goal. You're on a mission to reach the next level of partnership by the time you turn 40, whenever that might be. I'm not even going to guess. And I know you mentioned when we actually spoke briefly that one of the ways to do that was to dive into social media, sort of immersing yourself in it, being active, posting, getting on podcasts, and I've seen you all over the place. So you truly meant it, and you're doing it. What has it been like? Because there are many practitioners who are wondering, does it really work? How much of myself do I put out there? What has been your experience?
You're right about the goal, and it's much sooner than I'd like it to be. I'm going to be 40 in less than a year. And so it's coming up, and it's one way that I'm uh, targeting that goal, is through marketing and through podcasting and through social media, because everybody's got to find their own way in terms of like what kind of networking works for them and their personality. And my personality is such that walking into a big conference room and slapping a name tag on and just going and making small talk with either like-minded people or not, it's hard for me. It's I'm allergic to that type of environment. Whereas I can do the one-on-one, I can do the podcast, I can have conversations with people, and that to me is much more palatable to interacting with people, and it's a different just form of networking that works better with my personality. So I have been on dozens of podcasts at this point. And I do try to be more active on social media, whereas I had no social media presence prior to, I think it was July of this year. And it's one of those things where it's like you're investing time into it now, and I think it's going to pay dividends over time. There's been, just in that short window of time, I have seen an uptick in both traffic, impressions, and then ultimately in client engagement. So it's working. It's a matter of how long it's going to take, and how slow the process, or how fast the process is going to be.
Hmm. Talk about the process of getting on someone's podcast, and how much time do you put into finding the podcast and then also creating your content, and how often do you post?
Yeah, so getting on podcasts as a lawyer isn't a hard thing to do. A lot of shows have that desire to have a lawyer come on and give a legal perspective on an issue, or to speak to their audience as a lawyer. Um, the way I went about it was all in. There's no like half stepping for me with anything that I do. So it was a matter of reaching out to probably hundreds of podcasts in one sitting. And then, it's a numbers game. So if I reached out to 200 people and 50 people got back to me and wanted to schedule, then they just started scheduling, and it quickly became a very time consuming endeavor. And then, what I didn't really budget for, but what I'm noticing now is the pendulum swinging in the other direction. So while I reached out to a ton of podcasts when I wanted to start this project, now the reverse is happening. Now podcast hosts are reaching out to me and asking me to come on their show without me reaching out to them. And so I'm on that swing of the pendulum at this point. I try to multi-purpose the podcast that I'm on. Some of the hosts that have these shows are gracious enough to let me, chop up the video into more bite-sized clips. Nowadays, everybody wants like a 30-second viewing. They don't
Yeah.
want anything more than a minute. So I will chop up the videos that I'm on. I'll put them on YouTube. I'll put them on Instagram, Facebook, wherever, so that I'm, maximizing the exposure from each of the podcasts that I'm doing. So I try to post as often as I can. Podcasts have their own release calendar. You could record in August and it would be released in November or October. And so they're starting to just trickle in from shows that I recorded months ago. And sometimes there's as many as 3 or 4 released in a day. And so that's a matter of how much time do I have to invest in chopping up the videos, putting them on all these different social media platforms. But I post as often as I can. And if there's a day where I don't have some video content or something to post, then I'm writing a blog post or an article or some other form of engagement to just get in front of people.
Hmm. Do you do it all yourself?
I do, yeah.
You're a
It,
hyper-doer.
I try to be. My wife has coined it hyper attention disorder. It's like the opposite of ADD. She will tell you that if I'm on an airplane with her and I'm in the middle of a conversation, the plane's going to go down before I stop talking. And I've somehow found, according to her, at least the 25th hour in the day. And, I don't stop a project until it's done, even if that means I'm up at 3 in the morning doing something. This particular project is a little bit tricky because there's really no end to it. So it's a pretty consuming.
You're consistent, though.
I try to be. I think that's one of the, important boxes to check, at least as far as like social media goes. It's quality content, but it's also consistent content.
Agreed. And that's why I'm asking you these questions more so than any other guest, because everybody's trying to figure out what the magic proportion is. And I'm just like you. I started this podcast. I haven't stopped over a year ago, have not stopped. And I don't even watch the the likes, the engagement. It's just basically because to me, it's you just do it. You do it and you put one out. And I enjoy the process, what we're doing right now. And the minute we post it, I don't look back, getting ready for the next one. And staying in a moment, obviously. And same thing, content. People wonder, and I'm allergic to that. I'm allergic to, well, I don't have time. Well, you know what? You're brushing your teeth, don't you? You use the toilet, don't you? Just grab a phone, get on LinkedIn and get moving, or I mean, it could be walking and there's an idea. Do I need expensive equipment? No, you don't. Grab your phone and start filming, do something and stay with it. So I love it. I love what you're doing and you're starting to see results. Simple as that. You shared with me you had a pretty horrific accident.
Are we referring to me breaking my face? Is that the, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
I'd
looking
say
at your
that's
face and it looks fine. I cannot believe. Can you share how did it happen? And I can't believe how you recovered like this.
yeah, I was about 20, 21 at the time. It was winter, Chicago, obviously cold, ice. And I, was wearing an overcoat, had my hands in my pocket, slipped, fell forward. All that's there to break the fall with no hands out is my face. And so I broke both sides of my jaw. I shattered half a dozen teeth. I bit through my tongue. That was a less than enjoyable experience, to say the least. I was wired shut for about 8 weeks so the jaw would heal. Um, so, yeah, I'd say that's horrific.
Yeah. How did that experience, did it change your perspective on life? Just how you were seeing day to day?
For one, I don't walk with my hands in my pockets anymore. I don't let my kids walk with their hands in their pockets. So, certainly that had an effect on me. Um, I don't think about it a lot, day to day,
Hmm.
this many years later. But, it certainly did have some impact on me, at least at the time.
What do you do on the weekends when, I should say, what do you do if when you're not working?
When is that?
I was just reframing myself. So when you have time, you set aside your work, your phone, and here's your time with the kids, with your children and your wife. What do you guys enjoy doing?
Yeah, I joke just because it's hard to find time where I'm not doing something. To your point about you make time for what's important and things that you want to do. So I'm always doing something work related, whether it's answering emails, text messages, some form of social media posting, something. But there are at least an hour a day that I take for myself, and whether that's exercise or just rolling around with the kids. I have a 5 and a 3 year old, so their favorite activity nowadays is beating me up. So I let them do that as often as I can. And so between that and exercise, that's my sort of outlet for non-work.
What is your pet peeve?
I don't like being interrupted. I think it's rude, and I think that it's usually an indicator that if you're arguing with someone and they're interrupting you, it's because they don't feel comfortable in what they're arguing and they just don't want to hear what you have to say because they're concerned that you're right. So being interrupted is a big pet peeve of mine.
Hmm. What would you say the opposite? What do you appreciate the most about people?
At least in like the professional capacity, I very much like if a lawyer is able to remove the emotion. We can fight and be bitter adversaries in a courtroom, but once we walk outside the courtroom, those are our colleagues. Clients come and go. The other lawyers that you have to work with for the rest of your career, they're here to stay. And so when you make it personal with the other lawyer, only bad comes from that. So I very much appreciate when lawyers are able to distance themselves from the acrimony of the case and have a professional and courteous relationship, because it is a long career, and that courtesy, it goes both ways. For someone to extend no professional courtesies and then demand them in return, I think is unreasonable.
That sounds balanced. You're right. I think the time we take anything personally, whether it's as professionals or as people, it doesn't serve to anyone because we all bring our own perspectives into the situation. So that's always an issue. What would be on a sort of a parting thoughts? What would be advice for incoming attorneys? Something that you've experienced yourself.
If it's a new lawyer, like freshly out of law school, maybe it's a generational thing, but some of the new lawyers that I'm seeing, they come out of law school maybe with a sense of entitlement. I'm a lawyer. I want to start at the top of the food chain, and I want to be treated as though I'm royalty. And that's not reality, and that's not a good mindset. As someone that has literally started at the bottom as a law clerk and worked all the way different positions of paralegal, associate, partner, there's something to be learned at each one of those rings in the ladder. And I think for someone to just say, I want to jump right to the top, and not spend any time learning the steps to getting up there, you're doing yourself a disservice. And it's hard to lead a team if you haven't done what you're asking them to do. It's hard to lead a team if you can't sort of critique or offer revisions to something that you've never done yourself. So just having a willingness to learn and sort of being humble about, yes, you went to law school, congratulations, you have a law degree, but that doesn't make you better than the paralegals or the clerks or the secretaries. Oftentimes, they're going to know more than you do. So be humble, be willing to do the work. Nothing is beneath you, whether it's drafting, researching. You got to start from somewhere, and that's where you start. You don't just stroll out of law school and your first chair on a trial. It's just not reality.
Great advice. To the point, great advice. Have some humility and learn, grow, Yeah, because it's a tremendous responsibility, your field of work. I have a lot of respect for it. Absolutely. You're impacting people's lives. And people who do see it as a job. Anyway, it is not. It is a career. It's it's a huge responsibility. So, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate, Jonathan. You really have quite a unique background, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
And to our viewers and listeners, to find out more about Jonathan Steele and how to get a hold of him, make sure that you click on the link below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for our YouTube channel, Beyond the Bar Podcast. Follow us on all social media channels. And until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.